Hi, everyone. My name is Free Gagini, chairperson of Camp Aftermath, a Canadian registered charity supporting veterans, first responders, and frontline workers living with PTSD or any type of mental anguish as a result of their service. Now, today we have a very special guest on what seems to be a reoccurring podcast. Apparently, we're doing now, and it's our chief mental health expert, Dr. Whelan, over 30 years of service in the mental health realm, a veteran himself. So he's here today to talk about his latest book. He's written several books on PTSD and veterans in the military, which are pillars of our program. But now his latest book is focusing on addictions. We're here to talk about that book. We're here to talk about when it's going to get launched and what is really the essence of it all. So without further ado, Dr. Whelan, how the hell are you doing?
Good, thanks, Fareed. Hello again.
Yes, on this beautiful fall day. Now, let's get right into it. As I mentioned, your previous books have been about the military, PTSD. What kind of inspired you to go this way regarding addictions?
So as you remember, I spoke mostly about the mental health problems among military and veterans, mostly in the realm of PTSD because it's gotten so much priority. But what we miss talking about are the things that people do to try to manage being upset or distressed, and that's substance use. Now, substance use, alcohol is kind of still top of the list. There are other drugs, of course, but I really wanted to pay attention to that because it often gets overlooked.
Perfect. And so like, and that's very much prevalent in our cohorts that we've done. Substance abuse and alcohol abuse is very much prevalent in the cohorts we ran. But like from a professional perspective, can you kind of talk about in what capacities you've kind of worked with regards to addictions, and also from a personal point of view, which I think a lot of viewers want to understand. And this is because I love reading your books regarding the veterans and PTSD because you have a very unique insight in both, not just speaking from a professional point of view, but from being there as yourself, right? Being a veteran yourself. So could you speak to that regarding addictions, your professional role, and then also your personal kind of experience?
Okay, so I started working in addictions right after I left the military. Ran a halfway house, came back and worked in the military's addiction program for a number of years. So in that time, we also saw people who were diagnosed with all kinds of mental health problems, right? So the lens that was looked at in those days was that, okay, addiction is a disease. It may be or may not be related to these other mental health issues that people have. And in my view, from everything I'd read and research and just working with people, is that people's histories and their use of substances and other behaviors as well were intimately related, right? And so I was in a system, and we still have systems where the two are somehow disconnected. One does not relate to the other. So most of my work over the years has been really trying to help people understand the intimate connections between both those.
And your personal story to addictions.
So, I grew up in an environment where I was kind of picked on as a kid. I was shy, kind of introverted, always trying to fit in, always a bit wound up, always doing 120%, overdoing it to try to fit in. So as a teenager, when I discovered, along with my friends, drinking and some experimenting with drugs, I loved the experience of being buzzed or high, because all of a sudden, all of this other stuff, the memories of being bullied or not being good enough, all of that kind of vanished. Didn't really like the taste of alcohol. Didn't really like the effect of some of the drugs, but the experience of being buzzed and just not anxious and calm and being able to just fit in, that was an experience that I wanted to repeat over and over and over again, and I did.
And I've had the privilege of reading this book before it's been released, and what Dr. Whalen always does, he creates these fictional characters. So he tells a story and then he slides in data, so you're more receptive to receive it. And You just mentioned like your childhood, and a prevalent thing in this, and both really PTSD and addiction seems to be a kind of a common denominator, is childhood trauma. And could you like kind of speak to that? Like, what role does our childhood have in addictions?
Yeah, so yeah, we get really caught up in the diagnosis of PTSD, but children who grow up in stressed environments where they don't feel safe or things are not predictable. Like in my case, we moved around a lot. We moved to a new neighborhood. As I mentioned, I was a shy kid. I was picked on, bullied. I had to learn how to fight, which terrified me. So what I learned, and what a lot of people learned, I learned that I really couldn't trust people. And I learned to be vigilant or on all the time, because you never knew when you might get a smack or an insult or any of that. So you learn to be in a different mode. I don't know how else to describe it. And of course, our neurobiology kind of parallels that. We become more vigilant, more alert, and it's really hard to downregulate or to find places where you can just calm down on your own, especially if you don't know that skill.
Yeah, and in the story, it talks about how, I mean, I kind of compare it to someone coming back from deployment and that hypervigilance that was required of them while, like, in theater. It sounds like, if you one has suffered from trauma in their childhood, it's the same kind of hypervigilance all the time.
Yeah, yes, it is. I mean, we move into a different gear, and as you know, I mean, I know your story as well. In the military, we learn how to be, I mean, in high gear and that much more, right? I experienced the same thing when I returned from a NATO mission. It took 2, 3 weeks to kind of settle down again from being operational, and most of that was done in my case and most of my buddies drinking. It was the only way to kind of decompress a bit, try to figure out your surroundings, move into a different gear, right? And yeah, and that still happens.
No, very true. And you mentioned several times in your book that once someone is exposed, like whether it be through your childhood, whatnot, into this kind of hypervigilance, when it's constant, because trauma always happens in everyone's life. It's just part of life, right? But when it's
Yep.
consistent and persistent, there's a certain amount of neuroadaptation, which you use this word a lot in your book, that happens. Could you speak to like what that means, like in
So
one's brain?
yeah, so when we look at the effects of neuroplasticity, how our brain reorganizes itself, epigenetic change, how our brain adapts to the environments where we are in. So if you're in a constant state of preparedness for anything to happen, our brains will adapt accordingly, right? So we have our this brain that's geared up to look for threat. It doesn't really understand what safety feels like in your body physically. What's it like to calm down and not be scanning the environment all of the time? So that's a predicament that a lot of people find themselves. And it's not only in cases of, quote, the diagnosis of PTSD. Uh, People who have, who struggle with anxiety have the same kinds of issues, right? And they are more likely to be the ones who will drink more quickly and often more than other people when they're in a social gathering, to try to get to that state of being relaxed quicker. And they tend to overdo it, of course, overshoot it, and other things happen. They get embarrassed because of that, or they're shameful of the things they said or did when they were in that state. And of course, that can start another cycle of just trying to forget about the last drinking episode. So what I really try to
Yeah,
steer
sorry.
away from is this notion of that people have diseases. The good news is that people recover. People can learn how to contain themselves. We can learn how to find activities and engagement with other people where we can learn to trust other people and learn to relax.
So, I mean, that diagnosis or that recommendation seems very similar to other forms of mental health, right? This is not your final thing. This is not you don't have to wear this for the rest of your life. There is hope, and of course, with work, you can come out of it. But one of the things you mentioned, that so the alcohol and drugs, they do actually work, right? So, and that's why I think people want to go back to it, because it's not like that it doesn't work and they do it. Like, it does a really good job allowing you to calm down, and allowing to fit in, or like for something like, for example, like if you're nervous to talk to people and surroundings, it does actually help you become more social.
It works incredibly well. I mean, that's the allure, right? We're captured by that experience. Why should I feel socially awkward or out of place or anxious or wound up when I know the solution, despite the consequence that may come later, is right there, right? I don't have to put up with this state. And that's the real challenge for people, this idea of recovery. Let me put it this way. That's the real challenge for people who decide to move on without drinking, right? Um, it's learning how to speak up. It's learning how to engage other people. And I keep mentioning it. It's learning how to trust other people is pretty high up there in a requirement as well.
Yeah, and you had mentioned before in a previous conversation about, and these statistics are, I could be off a little bit, but like the way we even speak about like alcohol and drugs, like I'm going to relax and have some drinks with friends. I'm going to unwind and I'm going to drink. And something like above 80% of the civilian population uses alcohol as a way of just relaxing, right? And then that number goes up, I believe, above 90% for the military. So what do you have to say about that?
So we spend most of our time in our own little worlds, right? We're occupied in our lives, we're occupied in our worries, we're occupied with work. The idea of being part of communities, I mean, that's almost like a throwback to another era where we talk about community life. Most of us spend our times in our little bubbles in our own homes out of necessity. So the idea then of engaging other people, let's not forget, social settings, or a social animal. Social settings, there's a potential threat there of not belonging, of being out, of saying the wrong thing. So alcohol is a real, it helps buffer those kinds of that sense of awkwardness. And we equate the experience of being a little giddy or a little anesthetized from alcohol as a good experience, as a social experience. We learn that.
So it's almost like a little bit of neuro-linguistic programming going on in there, like relaxation, alcohol, relaxation, alcohol.
Sure. I mean, in our society, again, not saying more than I intend here. In our society, it is expected that you can drink socially. And if you don't, you need a good explanation for why you don't, right? Why aren't you having a drink, right? What's the problem? Versus, I choose not to drink. It's not an issue. So there is a social expectation that as adults, we do consume alcohol and that we do know how to manage it effectively.
Very interesting. Now, in your book, it talks about this as well, but just we were talking about how alcohol seems to be like the perfect solution to calm a hypervigilant brain down. What kind of, I mean, it's hard to discuss this in a quick blurb, but like, what message do you have for someone going through addictions right now that has that hypervigilance and needs, what alternative methods can one start the journey of discovery?
So if people are caught in this, I'll say the cycle of heavy drinking and then having hangovers and trying to manage the withdrawal from alcohol, that needs to be managed. That's a physical health issue that needs to be managed. For some people, it may be a week or a couple of weeks. They may need, help from their physicians and things just to calm down the effects of removing that CNS depressant from their system. So that's an immediate thing. After that, it's learning how to recognize, and this is what takes some time, recognize what's going on in their physical bodies. recognizing when they may be anxious or that they're down, or even when they're excited, right? And there are different ways that people can do that. Again, social engagement, physical activity, exercise, moderate physical exercise tends to be a wonderful thing because it helps reduce stress hormone, particularly cortisol, from our systems. Other things that have really caught on in the last few years, mindfulness, just being able to sit and breathe and not have to be agitated most of the time. Some people turn to yoga, some people turn to outdoor activities. Again, all of these are about aligning or tuning yourself again to your physical body. What else to say about that? Again, I keep going back to engaging with other people and important relationships, finding something that's meaningful to care about, somebody else, an aspect of ourselves that we may have put on the shelf for a long time.
Yes, and this sounds very, again, recurring to the cohorts we've had before, right? And creating community, creating connections, and it's, when you mention all those things, it's one of the things we always tell our participants, and you always say, is like, it's not any one of these things is going to help you, right? It's about kind of being a scientist and trying it, right? So it might be yoga or it might be going for a run, but you have to try to see what can replace that feeling that alcohol or drugs gave you, right? And it's kind of about being a scientist, as you always say.
Yeah. So it's leaving out the possibility, hope, if you will. Can I set my life on a different trajectory? Can I be captured by something again that doesn't repeat the same experience of being high or being, drinking or stoned and those sorts of things, but can I be captured in something again that gives me hope for a brighter future, right? So as I think I've mentioned in the past, I choose not to drink. Doesn't make me any better or worse than other people. So what I did was came to a place where I like and respect the person I am because I don't drink. Now I'm around drinkers in my family. I'm around social gatherings where other people drink. I can have a good time. I can be giddy. So all of the things that alcohol provided to me as a young man in my 20s, I don't need it to do those things anymore. I don't feel socially awkward, So that's the challenge for people, is really to find comfort within their own skins, if you will.
Very interesting. What if you were to have one takeaway from someone who reads your book, who's on this journey? What would it be, from like best case scenario when they read your book?
There are alternatives than being led to believe that you have an incurable disease, that there are different ways of understanding alcohol use or drug use, that we need to pay attention to other aspects of our life and make those important, right? For people who are in situations where, they don't have many resources, it's important that they understand that their use of substances may be their only buffer against situations that are just intolerable. So it's up to the rest of us, not to kind of judge them because of their predicament. We need resources. We need communities to stop looking and being afraid of people who are addicted and ask the question, not so much, what's wrong with them and what do they need is a better question. And we're not so good at that so far here.
Very powerful. So quickly, what is the name of this book and when is it coming out?
So it's Genes, Gods, and Red Herring. So I'm still aiming for end of October. It may be delayed. I mean, it's with web book designers and that sort of thing right now, and so I don't have any control over that. I'm still aiming for end of October.
Yeah, that's very exciting. So Dr. Whelan's agreed to meet us on one of these podcasts when the book comes out and actually do an official box opening of the first copy he gets. So please keep following us as we put these bad boys out. Dr. Whelan, thank you so much for taking the time today. And any messages, any final words, any last words? That's even worse. What's going on anyways?
So the last word will be, there is always a different trajectory possible.
Excellent. Thank you, Dr. Whelan. You have a great day.
Thanks for reading.